I'd like to talk for a few moments about hope that heals. On many occasions, people reached out to Jesus during his ministry and called upon his name. In fact, we know that a Canaanite woman and blind Bartimaeus were known to call upon the Lord and say, "Son of David, have mercy on me." The woman with the bleeding disorder thought, "If I touch his cloak, I'll be healed." Jairus spoke these words, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she'll live." What I'd like to do is take a look at one particular passage on one occasion where Jesus reaches out and he extends his hand and brings healing. Jesus had just finished the great sermon on the hillside, and when he came down, he was tired. Huge crowds had gathered, and I can imagine how exhausted he must have felt doing a complete day's ministry. But yet it wasn't done. And we read in our passage in Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, "When he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing,' he said. 'Be clean.' Immediately, he was cured of his leprosy." We can only imagine how exhausted Jesus must have felt at that moment, coming down from the mountain. But it wasn't over. How many times, though, as leaders, do we put in a complete day's worth of work and we're exhausted? And we're tired, we're spent, we're done, we're ready to go home and put the game on, put our feet up. Any game, it doesn't matter. But yet we find the phone ringing, or as we're walking out the door, we meet Sister Sue who needs prayer. And we find that our work is not done. The life of a leader in ministry. And I think that was a lot like what was happening here with Jesus. The day wasn't over. Ministry wasn't over. And he encounters this gentleman. I'd like to reflect on three things as we take a look at hope that heals on this particular passage. And the first thing is that Jesus saw the physical need and he met it in that moment. It's in an instant. The sick man we read was healed. In an absolute instant. It's important for us to recognize that leprosy, like AIDS today, was an incurable disease. It was violent, scabs all over your body, rotting of the flesh. It was terrible. In fact, lepers were considered outcasts to their communities. They were often disowned from their towns and their cities and put in outside colonies until they would be healed, or eventually they would die. And Jesus stands once again before an untouchable, someone that was considered or deemed unclean, and he reaches out and extends his hand, and there's hope that heals in that moment. How many times do we encounter individuals within our community, in our churches, in our backyards, that feel unwanted, that feel like an outcast, that feel deemed unworthy? And Jesus here models what it looks like to take time out of our day and to stop everything, paying attention to what God is doing, paying attention to what the Holy Spirit is prompting in us, and making time for the divine interruptions. Part of reaching out, we take a look at the passage in Luke 19:10, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." But what motivated his compassion? Jesus knew the need. Jesus saw the need, and he modeled the mission for us to share the vision of a world that's desperately in need. As we take a look at the Great Commission to go into all the world and to preach the news to all creation, Jesus didn't say go into some of the world. He certainly didn't say go into part of the world. He didn't say go into the part of the world that you feel like going into. He said to go into all of the world, to the uttermost parts of the world. This is the key. If we don't see the need, then perhaps we will not be motivated to act. If we don't reach out, I think the question would be, then who will? And if we don't act, then who will? Jesus saw the need, and he met the need. And he was moved with compassion. The second thing, as we reflect on a hope that heals, is compassion requires action. Jesus had compassion on those that he ministered to. That compassion emerged into action. I tell students all of the time that the greatest way that you can make a difference in someone's life is by your actions, not just simply your words, but let your actions speak louder than your words, because it's about a lifestyle. How we live our lives is so important because people are watching us all the time. Just had a conversation this morning on the way here that reminded me of who I've been called to be a light and an example in my community. Reminded me of that as a leader and as a Christ follower, it's important that we are an example and that we're a light and that we're an influence. Finally, when we reach out to them, they will reach out to Him. As leaders, we must lead by example. We must step out of our comfort zones and reach our communities. How are we connecting our community to Christ? What are we doing to provide a hope that heals? Working with one of our missionaries, one of our very own here in Southern California, last summer taught me that you can't just share words with people and expect them to know Christ. You have to take action. This is what he said. Adam, before we can just share words, we have to have good deeds in their lives, because good deeds lead to goodwill, which leads to good news. And I thought for a moment that people have actual needs all around us. And most of the time, we must be willing to step out of our comfort zones and provide for the physical needs first. This will open the door to the gospel. That's what Christ modeled all through scriptures for us as He met with individuals that society wouldn't meet with, and He met a need. He provided hope that heals. Certainly God could do it all Himself, right? But He chooses to use us. He chooses to work through our mess, through our brokenness. He chooses to utilize our brokenness for His glory. When we make what we have available to God, He will take it and He will do the unthinkable. God is looking for availability. He's not just looking for our ability. May we be leaders that are available to provide a hope that heals to all that we come in contact with.